Barry, welcome to the Democratizing SEO podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very, very well. Austine, how are you?
Yes, very well, thank you. Thank you so much for your time. I've followed you for a number of years, and I have to say it's a pleasure to be speaking with you. Today we're going to be talking about keyword research for news publishers, news publications. And I have a feeling you're going to have some interesting insights to say about this, especially since you're someone who specializes in news SEO, news-based SEO.
Yeah. Pretty much all my clients are news websites now, and they have somewhat different requirements and goals than classic SEO. So it's much more about winning the moment of the news and making sure that your articles appear in Google's news specific ecosystem, specifically top stories boxes, which are highly volatile. You know, articles drop in and out of top stories very rapidly, few hours, few days maximum. So it's all about winning that initial moment in search for news articles. Which of course makes it very different than classic SEO, where we're focused on building long-term signals and long-term rankings.
Yeah. I'm curious, what led you to want to specialize in news SEO?
I've always been fascinated by news in itself. I mean, you know, like most people, we read a lot of news. We're sort of almost addicted to that constant news cycle. But it wasn't really on my radar as an SEO discipline until I moved to Northern Ireland, because I'm originally from the Netherlands. And one of my first jobs here was in-house as SEO at the Belfast Telegraph, one of the major local newspapers. And that really opened my eyes to how SEO for news websites is very different from SEO for the classic websites. So I learned a lot basically on the job. And I tried to play around with Google News and top stories and see what worked and what didn't work, and learn as much as I could in my time there. And then when I decided to go freelance several years later, through some contacts and connections, I ended up working with news publishers who wanted to tap into that experience, because I realized it at that time, and even still now to a large extent, it's a very underserviced niche within SEO. I mean, it's quite easy to find SEOs who have experience in e-commerce, experience with content, experience with all kinds of industries. But experience with news, there are not that many. Most people who have experience in SEO for news websites tend to work in-house at news websites. They tend not to be freelancers. So it was a bit of a one-eyed king in the land of the blind moment, maybe, where I just happened to be able to build a profile because there was nobody else out there who was doing the same thing, or very few people out there. So I got very lucky to work with really big publishers, global brands, and with every project I learned more. I became better, and then I started writing my own newsletter on the topic to share what I knew with the rest of the world. And I think that was really the moment when I started to establish myself as one of the main voices in the space of SEO for news publishers. And it's basically a matter of right time, right place, having a lot of luck in the process, and having the luck as well to work with people at those news organizations who were very, very good at their jobs, and learning a lot from them with every project that I did.
Now, when I think of keyword research for news organizations, I think of traditional SEO or classic SEO, as you quite nicely coined it. I love that phrase. Classic SEO is very reactive, right? So you want to get data on a certain topic, you have to wait at least a month, right? Every single bit of data from Keyword Planner is a month behind. So it's reactive in that sense. How then does an SEO carry out keyword research for a news organization?
Yeah, it's a very different kettle of fish, that's for sure. I think with news, we don't necessarily want to be led by the concept of keywords, but by the concept of topics. You have to understand what your topics are as a news publisher, and how you describe those topics in an optimal way to align with how people search. You generally can't do keyword research for news articles until after the story has already become news, and that at that stage you'll be sort of running after the fact.
Right.
You can get a little bit of help with a tool like Google Trends, which has a real good real-time trends dashboard for most countries, where you can sort of see what's trending real-time, semi-real-time, I would say it, in your specific country, and you can filter that if it's business or sport or entertainment or something like that. But even that data is several hours old, so it's not exactly cutting edge even in the context of news. But it can help you sort of guide your phrasings on how to say things and how to pick the right phrasing that aligns best with how people search for a topic. But the bottom line is you have to understand what your topics are as a publisher and how to best describe that again and again and again in every article, in every headline, in every intro paragraph to make sure that Google understands that that is the main topic of the article. Mm-hmm. And that's just basically having a good understanding of your specialties as a publisher and being aware of how search engines evaluate headlines and how that's slightly different from how people might evaluate headlines. Humans are very good at picking up context. We see a photo, we see a sentence, we will marry the two, and the sentence doesn't have to have the name of the person in the photo in it because we already see that and we make that connection instantly. Mm-hmm. Search engines don't make that connection, so you have to spell out the name of the person in the headline next to the photo, as well as have it in like the alt attribute of the photo and things like that. So it's about the little details. Mm-hmm. And there's one particular concept that I really, really like, which is how journalists tend to write anyway. And that's about the 5 W's. A friend of mine, Dan Smollen, he's also very good at SEO for news publishers. He used to work at the Irish Independent. He wrote an article about this on Search Engine Journal. And the 5 W's are basically what happened, who's involved, when did it happen, where did it happen, and why did it happen. So it's the 5 W's. And if you align your headlines with that sort of concept, or you try to explain the 5 W's in various different ways and how it applies to the story in particular, and you make sure that the answers to the 5 W's are quite explicit. You don't try to hide them, you don't try to abbreviate them too much, you don't try to use any word gags, but you explicitly state what has happened, why it's happened, when it's happened, all those sorts of things, then you will pretty much automatically end up crafting an optimized headline for Google News. Because that's exactly what users would search for. Users want answers to those 5 W questions. And if you provide them, you will end up with an optimized article.
When I think of topics in the classic SEO term, I think of pages, right? And I'm thinking, okay, head term topic or head phrase. I want a specific page to rank for it. But it sounds as though there could be several pages created for a topic in a news-based SEO or news organization. Is that the case? And if it is the case, are you guys facing a shit ton of cannibalization issues?
Not really, no. The cannibalization isn't really there because a news article has a very short lifespan in Google's ecosystem. After 48 hours, the article is out of news, generally, and it's not news anymore. And Google is not likely to keep surfacing it as a news story. We tend to have one champion page per topic on a news website as well, and that's called the topic hub. It can be the tag page, it can be a section page or a category page, but it's basically the page that collects all articles around that same topic. For example, you can have a Joe Biden topic page, and all the articles where Joe Biden is listed, is mentioned, are collected in that topic page. And that would be the page we optimize for the topic of Joe Biden. And new articles get added to that all the time, of course, as you produce new articles around that topic. But those individual articles are more an expression of your expertise in the topic rather than your champion page for the topic. Because the purpose of those articles is not to appear in the 10 blue links. The purpose of the articles is to appear in top stories boxes at the top of a search result, or in Google News, or in the News tab, or in Google Discover. And the shelf life of those articles is very, very short. So you use the topic pages to show your expertise, pretty much as you would do with classic SEO, to show that you are good at that topic and you deserve to rank for that topic. But the expression of rankings is more focused on the articles that are added to that topic all the time as you publish them, as there's news stories to report on that. And that's, again, one thing that makes news a little bit different from classic SEO, and that every new page that you create, you are basically building on what you've historically done, like with normal SEO, but the page itself has a very short shelf life. You have a very limited opportunity to get traffic to it. And then the next story comes in, and then the next story comes in. So it's always about trying to both build those long-term authority signals that Google is looking for, while at the same time maximizing that very short-term opportunity that you get with any one specific news article as part of the news cycle.
Mm-hmm. A while ago, I want to say 18 months or so ago, I wrote a post, or actually it wasn't a post, it was a podcast, back when I was doing phase 1 of the podcast, which was just me monologuing, for 10 minutes every week. And I talked about proactive keyword research. And this is where I distinguished traditional classic SEO versus having an anticipation of what people will be searching for in the coming months, weeks, or even days, right? And it sounds to me as though this right there is what news-based SEOs very much focus on, anticipating what people will be searching for based on the topic that they'll be that they want to target. Is that correct?
I think to a large extent it is. So some aspects of the news cycle are quite predictable. You know, Apple has an event, I think that's happening today. We know what's going to happen. We know what people are going to be searching for. We can prepare stories in advance and prepare headlines and keywords and topics in advance. Other things are very reactive. When a news event happens, you don't necessarily know initially how the best way is to describe it, which is why you have to understand the topics and how Google likes you to write about those topics. And that goes back to historic reporting on similar issues, you know. It's very rare where you find a news story that is entirely new, that has never happened before in the history of humankind. There tend to be examples previously of this stuff happening. So you can go back and say, right, we've learned that this sort of headline for that type of story works really, really well, and that doesn't work. So every new article, every new news cycle is also an opportunity to learn and refine your process. And it is a bit hit and miss, you know. Sometimes you have a headline that you feel captures things really, really well, but then audience behavior is slightly different. People have a slightly different preference in how they phrase a search for a topic like that, which means you might not win that particular news cycle, and you have to wait for the next update to the news story or the next version of the story to come out to then tap into it. So it's part about, like you said, anticipating how people might search, especially with seasonal events. You can sort of guess what happens. The next election comes around, the next technology release, whatever it is. Part of it is also understanding, you know, how basic search behavior always focuses on people's names, places, those sorts of things, and ensuring you optimize for those. And part of it is just being a bit reactive and trying to see what actually works and how people respond to that in the context of a search result.
With classic SEO, we have branded terms and non-branded terms. When I'm thinking of topics, I'm thinking of entities. And when I'm thinking of entities, I'm thinking predominantly of branded terms. This is, of course, having people as brands themselves. So would you say news-based SEO focuses very much on brands?
It focuses very much on entities. News is all about entities, because that's also how Google understands news topics. If you optimize your website for having good topic hub pages, you know, which is a good practice for news publishers, and you optimize your headlines for individual articles for explicitly mentioning those topics, you are optimizing for entities. You are optimizing for your own news publisher's website as part of Google's knowledge graph, creating connections between your publication and the entities that you report on. And with every article, you strengthen those connections, basically. So it's all down to entities. It's one of those areas of SEO that I feel many SEOs underappreciate. You know, just how powerful the knowledge graph actually is in determining where your website ranks. And this is becoming ever more important with EEAT signals filtering into knowledge graph as well, where individual authors have a more prominent place, where Google wants to see that you employ professional writers to write for your publication, and that those writers have that expertise on the topics, the entities that they write about themselves. So it all comes down to the knowledge graph and maximizing your presence and strength in that knowledge graph as a publication by, very explicitly writing about specific topics, explicitly mentioning them, having good internal link graph that points to your dedicated topic page or champion page on those topics. So yeah, you can call it brand search, you can call it entity search. It all comes down to the same thing, making sure that you write about the topics that people search for in a way that Google understands it, so that Google sees you as that reputable source on that topic.
This is just mind-blowing to me and extremely fascinating, because for years now, right, I've always said Google and social media, or search and social media, share the same audience. And now it seems very much apparent that they are targeting the same set of eyeballs, users. And when you think of the term that Google published a number of years ago now, from strings to things, it just makes sense. And I think the more we head into the very near future of what we're going to see in search, the more it's important for SEOs to focus heavily on entities, in my opinion, particularly branded entities. Because when you look at social media, right, the entirety of social media is akin to Google's approach to serve users with information as quickly as possible, and in this case, news-based information. Social media does the same thing, the exact same thing, and they do so for entities, i.e. people, i.e. brands. So they are targeting the same audience, right? So Google, in effect, has a major issue, and they're facing off against social media like TikTok. How important is it for Google to ensure that they protect what they have, their moat in terms of search?
Yeah, it's existential for them, isn't it? It's a fundamental threat to the whole business. But the way they've gone about it recently is a very interesting one, because Google has managed to keep people on Google without people performing searches. You may wonder, what the hell does he mean? I mean the Discover feed. The Discover feed on Android phones or in the Google app on your iPhone is a semi-social media feed. It's a recommendation of articles based on what Google knows about you, about the interests and topics that you like, i.e. about entities. And Google has become very, very good at feeding people articles in their Discover feed that keep people going back to the Discover feed, on and on and on. Some of my publishing clients get insane amounts of traffic from the Discover feed, like millions of daily visits, because it's just so addictive for people, because it's a constant feed of articles that Google knows for a fact those people are interested in. It's a very highly personalized feed. And I find it a very interesting mechanism, because it means Google remains front and center in people's attention span, even when they're not searching. It's sort of taking the most addictive elements of a social media feed, like Facebook's news feed, and then putting it in the context of a pure text-based article feed with some video content as well, without the social element. You leave your friends and your family and all that stuff out of it, but purely the addictive dopamine feeding aspect of content that you enjoy, one article after the other. And it's also why TikTok is so familiar and so addictive. It does the exact same thing, but in short form video format. And Discover does it with news articles and primarily text format. So I think Google has already managed to sort of safeguard their presence there a little bit. The only problem they sort of have is that at the moment, Discover is sort of a sidetrack. It's an additional thing in addition to search. It doesn't replace search. It doesn't integrate with search, at least not directly, even though the searches you do feed into Discover, because it basically informs Google what you're searching for and what you might be interested in. So they might show more of that. But it is a very interesting way for Google to keep an audience engaged and have more opportunities to advertise to them and make money off of them without having to actually build an entire social network. They don't have to know who all your friends are, and who your family are, and how you interact with them. They just manage to take one part of social media, the news feed, and make it its own sort of separate product that they're really successful at. So, but yeah, it's an interesting dynamic there, and you see that in the publishing world especially, they see social medias like TikTok being a bit of a threat to them, because especially the younger generation consume a lot of news via TikTok, but they put news there in brackets because it's not really news. So it's very hard on those platforms to distinguish news from propaganda or disinformation. So I think we as a society have to be a bit careful of that particular trend, because there's a real risk we end up with a very uninformed generation of people who consume news in a way that we can't. There's no journalistic approach applied there. It's just, people mouthing off in short form videos with no journalistic principles applied, no fact checking, no proper journalism, and journalism itself is worth safeguarding. It is a very important part of a healthy, functioning society that we have proper journalism, that we hold power to account, that we question the narratives of governments, and that, we have the ability to hold our elected officials to account and basically get them out of office if they're doing the wrong things. And without journalism, we can't do that. You literally can't do that. You end up in very authoritarian states where no dissenting voices are allowed. And I don't think anybody in their right mind wants to live in that sort of society.
When you think of the 10 blue links, right, and you bear in mind most people now use mobile more than desktop, and you have things like Perspective, SGE, Discover, and these potentially could be more useful in the eyes of Google to users, right? What happens to the 10 blue links in, let's say, by 2030?
Ooh. You want me to predict the future? I'm notoriously bad at that.
The reason I ask this is because I have a very strong suspicion, and I'm very much aligned with Jason Bernard with the idea that the 10 blue links could evolve out, right? And I'm seeing it from several different angles that this is something that's inevitable. And I just want to know your thoughts on it. Just your general thoughts.
I'm not going to be one who contradicts Jason Bernard, because that man is wicked smart. So if he says something is likely to happen, I'm gonna follow his lead on that particular front. But on the other hand, the death of 10 blue links has been proclaimed many times before. It hasn't yet happened. I do think less people are going to worry about it and click on them, especially with all the features. Again, relating it back to my specialty, news. If there is a top stories box at the top of a search result, you can guarantee most people are going to click on it. They're not going to scroll below it. They're going to click on an article in the top stories box because of its prominence, because it aligns with what people probably want to know. So just having a top stories box means that even if you're the number one organic blue link, you're not going to see a lot of traffic off of it. So I think Jason's probably right. If a search feature is going to be dominant in a particular search result, be that a top stories box, an SGE box, maybe a commercial e-commerce box with recommended products, things like that, then the 10 blue links are probably not going to generate a lot of traffic. I actually think they will probably still stay there visually, because I think it is still part of Google's homework, as in this is why we rank these websites high. This is Google showing us that, we have all these other options as well. And Google realizes they sort of need to do that to have that level of trust from their users, that users trust Google to have made the right decisions by giving them those choices, even though the users might never use those choices. But in terms of traffic potential, yeah, it's decreasing. I don't think the current generation of SGE is going to be stealing a lot of traffic, especially on mobile, because it's clunky to type in sufficiently long prompts to make SGE useful. I think in a future iteration, it might become a bit more useful and interactive, maybe when it's voice activated, or maybe when it auto suggests certain prompts for you based on what you've searched on and based on what Google knows about you, that it becomes more useful. But yeah, just having different features on a search result means there is less opportunity for the 10 blue links to generate traffic, for sure.
When I think of search, the SERP competition, and let me give an example with, let's use an entity, Joe Biden, right? If there is a news event around Joe Biden and you have 5 brand news organizations targeting that specific thing, right, around Joe Biden, is it then a case of the person who ranks quote unquote the best, or who has the best visibility, is the one who releases the information the quickest?
No, you don't have to be first. No, that's a misunderstanding, and it goes against every journalistic instinct. That every newspaper wants to be the first to write about a topic, and in the context of news on Google, first is rarely rewarded. Best is rewarded, especially if you're publishing at the right time in the news cycle. You sort of have to see a popularity of a news topic as sort of a bell curve. It starts low, it peaks, and then it drops off again. If you're the first to publish a news story, the line is still flat. People aren't searching for it yet because nobody knows it's a news story. And then people start searching for it more because, the awareness and people want to know what happened. And if you publish then, you're probably more likely to get that top stories box because Google has a very strong preference for newer articles. And Google is quite bad at recognizing original publishers. Google say they want to reward original publishers, the first to break a story. And in some versions of Google, like Google.com, they have the highly cited label. If you are the first to break a story and a lot of other publishers list you as the original source, then you might get the highly cited label and have a prominent fixture in top stories. But for major news events that are covered by many different outlets, there tends not to be one. There is no highly cited there, so everybody's fighting for the same traffic. In which case, you want to make sure that your article is not too early, because it will be seen as an old article by the time the popularity of the search reaches the peak. So you want to be a little bit later and maybe have a bit more content, a better idea of how to best phrase things, like I said earlier, what the best optimal phrasing and keywords are, and having more information about the news event. So then, in that case, you win on every front. You have a better article with a better headline, more content, and you're newer, you're more recent. In which case gives you a much better chance of getting that top stories box. Having said that, the biggest individual ranking factor for articles has nothing to do with the article itself, but everything to do with your topic authority as a news publisher. You have to be seen by Google to be an authoritative source on that topic. Otherwise, no article is ever going to rank. So that's where you have to build the long-term value, being a reputable reporter on that specific topic, before you are able to get the short-term value of having your article show up in top stories.
So a new news organization, let's say one that started at the start of this year, they most likely won't be able to outperform a news organization that's been going for 10 years.
They're not even going to be able to get into Google News and top stories for at least 2 years.
Yeah, that's true.
That's sort of the minimum. It takes about 2 years before Google recognizes you as a reputable source, and then you have a chance of starting to appear in Google News and top stories. Discover can be quite quick. If you write good content, often enough, 3 to 6 months, you might start getting traffic from Google Discover. But from Google's news specific ecosystem, like top stories, Google News, and the news tab, it's 2 years of effort before you even start to get into those boxes in the first place. So if you're just about launching a new media startup, you sort of have to forget about Google traffic for the first 2 years. You still have to put the building blocks in place, focus on topics that you really want to dominate, have good quality reporting, send the right signals, good technical SEO, all of that. With the full knowledge, you're not going to get the full benefit of that until 2 years or longer down the line. So you have to have a lot of patience, perseverance, and have to have a very clear goal where you want to go. And then you've got to stick at it. You have to really work at it. You can't get a website in Google's new specific ecosystem in a short amount of time. And Google does that on purpose, because they want websites to earn it. They want websites to be seen as reputable. They don't want to risk ranking a website in top stories that is a propaganda outlet or has a lot of disinformation. So that's why Google is hesitant when it comes to new websites, and that's why you have to work so hard to earn that placement in the first place.
For a new organization then, a new media organization, is it a case of they should most likely stick with classic SEO, social media perhaps, and over time build their reputation before they earn that traffic from news?
Yes, absolutely. I think there is still value in doing the classic SEO things, like the topic hubs, good tagging, good internal linking, optimized headlines, all of that sort of thing. because you have to put the foundations in place for that
Right.
success later down the line. And at the same time, you want to get traffic to the website, obviously. And social media is a much quicker way than search for that. The potential for social media is a lot lower. I mean, for most of my publishing clients, Facebook is maybe 20-25% of traffic, for example. So it's not going to be a massive driver of traffic, but it might be enough to keep you going until you start appearing in Google's new specific ecosystem, until you graduate from the blue links to the top stories boxes, which, like I said, is 2 years or more for most websites. So it's about making sure you have that strategy in place from the start so that you're doing the right things to build the value for Google that will materialize later down the line. But at the same time, you're still trying to get enough traffic in to make it a worthwhile venture.
You used an interesting word right there, ecosystem. When I think of all of these platforms, Google, Bing, TikTok, other platforms, right? They all seem to be geared towards and are related to a word you used earlier, knowledge graph. How valuable is it for SEOs to ensure entities are structured in a way that's usable or suitable for the knowledge graphs? Bearing in mind, knowledge graph is across these several ecosystems.
It's probably the single most important thing you can do as an SEO. I mean, we as SEOs still talk about keywords. We still talk about keywords and articles and that sort of stuff. But what are keywords? Keywords are a way to formalize entities in the knowledge graph into words. What you're doing when you optimize an article for a specific keyword is you're optimizing your article for that entity. That's what you're doing. Everything in Google, and I do mean everything, is underpinned in varying degrees by the knowledge graph. Same with Bing, same with TikTok, same with Facebook. They have their own versions of knowledge graphs. Some even use the same knowledge graph. But it's all underpinned by the knowledge graph. And why is that? Because it is the best mechanism that has been invented so far for the real world to become machine readable. It is a way for Google and Bing and Facebook and all the other companies to make it so that they understand what you mean when you say Joe Biden and why that is the president of the USA and what the USA is and what the role of president is and what the Democratic Party is and how they're all connected. The knowledge graph is how search engines understand that. And all machine systems understand that. They have to have a version of a knowledge graph so that they can make sure that the experience they give to their users aligns with the real world and doesn't totally disconnect in such a way that we have no idea what we're seeing and why we're seeing it. We want to see things that we like. We want to see things that we engage with. And that is all based on what we as people like. And that is, again, entities and relationships between entities. That's how the human brain is hardwired. That's how human society exists. And that's also how machines try to understand the real world through the knowledge graph.
With Google Discover, is there a preference in terms of content format? Is it a case of text is still reigns king, or is it videos, images, a combination of all three, multimedia based content? Is there like a specific format that really works?
Yeah, it's still mainly text, mainly articles, but we see more videos pop in there as well. I haven't seen images. It's not an Instagram feed by any stretch. It's predominantly text with a little bit of video, and more. I think Google is putting more effort into it to make it a more intuitive system, and more engaging system as well. But still very much favored towards text articles. So that is still the dominant format on Discover. There is a little bit of a friction between optimizing headlines for Discover and optimizing headlines for search, because with search you have to be quite explicit and very explicitly mention the topics and entities. Whereas for Discover, you still have to have a main topic, a main entity, otherwise Google won't know what the article is about. But you can be a bit more clickbaity in your headlines, a bit more sensationalist with Discover, because it does behave a little bit more like a social media feed versus a pure search feed. And that means sometimes headlines that are optimized for search don't necessarily work really well in Discover, and vice versa. So it's about trying to find that happy medium if you want to focus for Discover or want to focus on search, to see what sort of headline works best for which article, to get maximum traction in both.
Is there such a thing as over optimization?
Yes. Definitely. It's not something that necessarily translates in the short term, but in the long term, if you go a bit overboard and you stuff keywords in there, you spam keywords, you will trigger certain filters in Google's system that are related about content quality. It will be seen as low quality content. And those signals, I think, accumulate over time, and that means by the next algorithm update, you might see a massive drop because you're seen as over-optimizing your content. You're trying to game the algorithms too much. So yes, you want to make sure that you have your keywords and topics in the headline and the opening paragraph. But after that, you should write naturally and not try to over-optimize too much for whatever topic you're covering, because it's not a natural way for you to write, and it might trigger the wrong signals in Google.
Yeah. When I think of news organizations and the content that they tend to have, it seems very much, you can see the SEO in it. let me put it that way. And it makes sense that almost every time there is an algorithm update, it affects these brands, within classical search. Does it, even if it affects from that point of view, does it matter from a Google Discover point of view?
Yes. Google admitted not too long ago that Discover is also using search algorithms.
Right.
The same quality factors that go into Google Search also go into Google Discover. And we see that when a publisher is affected by an algorithm update, almost always it's also reflected in the Discover traffic. Not always, but most of the time. The website goes up in search, it goes up in Discover. Goes down in search, goes down in Discover as well. So, because it's based on the same quality algorithms, the same EEAT signals, the same topic authority signals. So that makes perfect sense that, when they go up and down in one, you go up and down in the other. Sometimes you see that Discover fluctuates more than search. I've seen it with some publishers that lost a lot of Discover traffic, but search traffic was almost entirely unaffected. And it's very hard to pinpoint exactly why that is. It might be that Discover places emphasis on certain signals more than search does, or has slightly different quality signals it sometimes looks at. And sometimes you almost feel it's like a manual trigger where Google says, I do not want that publisher to be shown too often unless people specifically search for it. So you just lose most of your Discover traffic, but your search traffic is still there. But, I try not to get too much into the conspiracy theory side of things, because then you start to doubt everything about reality. So you sort of have to optimize what you can control, right? Optimize what is there in front of you. And because Google is so opaque and is such a black box, it's very easy to go off on tangents and in directions that have no bearing on actual reality. So you have to sort of find a way to ground your knowledge and ground your efforts as an SEO into what you actually know and what you can prove, and not try to get carried away too much by going in different directions.
Right. Let me briefly take you back to when you started specializing within news-based SEO. What was it like with the brands who came to you with an SEO problem around their news organization business?
Well, first I was terrified because, after the Belfast Telegraph, which was a very educational experience, and I'm very grateful for working with the people I did at the Belfast Telegraph, but it's still a relatively small local regional newspaper. The first major news project I had after that was The Sun in London, the major UK tabloid website. Relaunching their website, they dropped the paywall, built a new platform, and I was involved as a consultant on that project. That was terrifying. And I thought, this, if it goes well, great. If it goes badly, that's my career ruined. and because I didn't have that much expertise with news at that stage, I was quite confident in my technical SEO capabilities, but not necessarily in my news SEO capabilities. And this is back in 2016. I thought, I was full of imposter syndrome. I was like, I can't believe I'm actually doing this. I can't believe they're trusting me with all of this. Fortunately, that project went really, really well and opened a lot of doors for me. But with every project, and even now still, I have these moments where I get approached by a news brand that I've been a big fan of for many years. And it's a pinch myself moment, like really, I get to work with these guys. And B, it's a, oh my God, I hope I don't mess this up moment. I hope I can deliver some value for these people, because the people who tend to work at these companies, they're very smart. They're very good. They know exactly what they're doing. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the time, they don't necessarily need me, but they need someone to tell them that what they're doing is the right thing. They need someone who's seen a lot of different websites and has worked with a lot of different newsrooms to come in and tell them, yeah, you're doing it right, or maybe you need to do things slightly differently. It's more of a sanity check almost, that they're on the right track, that they're having the right processes in place, or maybe find things that they can improve, because news is highly competitive, obviously, and sometimes doing things just a little bit better than your competitors can have massive impact later down the line. It can give you literally millions more visitors in the course of a year. So finding that little competitive advantage is very valuable to a lot of news publishers. And that's why they want to do these sanity checks. I want to bring in someone who's seen multiple websites and multiple contexts and sort of knows the strengths and weaknesses of what Google is looking for in terms of news websites and how that applies to their specific website. It's still daunting. It's still exciting every time I get to work with a new publisher, be that like a big multimedia conglomerate or a very small focused niche publisher who just does one topic and everything in between. I like the challenge that every single website brings, and every single time it's an opportunity for me to learn, because every website is different, has unique challenges, and with every project I learn a little bit more about what works in Google and what doesn't work in Google. And it's an opportunity for me to also share what I know, because I don't know about you, Austine, but I learned by asking questions. I learned by other people being generous with their time and their knowledge. And that's also what I want to pass along, both to clients and to other SEOs. Just sharing what I know, no secrets, no hidden tricks. Just this is how I think it works. And, if you learn something different, please share it with me as well, because I think as a total SEO community, that makes us stronger, that makes us smarter, and allows us to deliver more value for our clients.
Yeah, totally. I imagine for the bigger the organization, the more important it is to have the ways of working with SEO very much streamlined. And a lot of organizations, SEO tends to be a channel that's brought in because there's been a problem with the SEO traffic. What's the ways of working with SEOs like now compared to how it was back in 2016, 2017?
I think as an industry and as a channel, we've really matured. And 2015, 2016, I was in a lot of meetings where I had to explain the value of search and SEO. I'm not in those meetings anymore. I don't need to explain it anymore. The clients know. News publishers especially, they know. They don't need explained how important Google is for their business. They know exactly how important Google is for their business. They may not like it, but they know they need to play that particular game. I don't have to explain the value of SEO and search anymore. The conversation I'm having now are very different in that regard. It's more about how do we maximize SEO? How do we have the best possible workflows, the best possible processes, so that we capture the maximum value of search with every article that we publish. And I think it's important for organizations to be at that level. If I were to be approached by a client where I still had to have that conversation, why is SEO important, I would probably not want that project in the first place. Because if at this stage of the web and the internet, a website doesn't understand the value of search to their business, you shouldn't be in business. I'm sorry. You should be doing something else entirely. Go build houses somewhere or something, but go do some farming, but stay the hell off the internet.
Right.
It's not negotiable anymore. You have to have a certain level of understanding of where your audience comes from, where your customers come from. And search tends to be the biggest source from pretty much everybody out there, with some exceptions. Some companies found ways to make social media absolutely sync for them. That's great. And search will never be a great channel for them. Others rely very heavily on email because they've got loyal, dedicated audiences. Great. But for like 90% of businesses out there, search is it. Half your traffic or more will probably come from search. And I shouldn't have to explain a company's business model to them. They should understand their own business model. And my role should then be to help maximize value for particular parts of that business model. But I'm not explaining your business to you. That's your problem. I'm going to help you do your business better, but you're not hiring me to be your business consultant. I'm the SEO guy. That's the only thing I know how to do.
Right. I see a world where every brand understands SEO the way they understand social media. And I think we're rapidly going to get to that reality. And I'm so looking forward to it, because for me, it's the SEO, just my personal opinion, is the core of digital marketing. I mean, email is a bigger channel as far as retention, as far as serving your client base. But SEO, there's something special about SEO. This is why it's, in my opinion, more than a marketing channel. It's a business development channel. It's a website development channel. It's many things. It's so powerful. News organizations switching to a subscription-based model, do you think that has really impacted their SEO even to this day?
Yes and no. I personally am a fan of paywalled websites and subscription models, especially if you have a freemium model, like 4 or 5 articles for free, and then the paywall comes up. It allows readers to sort of sample your reporting a little bit, get a bit of an idea of what you are about, and then decide whether or not they want to pay for that news. I do think news needs a business model. It's, we can't have news for free. The BBC is lucky that it's one of the few companies that does proper journalism that's publicly funded. But even then, it has a lot of detractors in the United Kingdom that don't want to pay for the BBC. So I think news should be self-sustaining, and just throwing advertising on a web page is probably not going to be enough for proper news to be sufficiently rewarded. Plus, if you're just chasing after clicks as a news publisher, you're going down routes that nobody wants to go down. You're writing pure clickbait articles, just trying to get as many clicks and as many ad impressions as possible. So yeah, I think paywalls are an important part of news, and I do think we'll end up in the next 5 to 10 years with most news websites having some form of paywall or subscription model, even if it's just, you get the basic stuff for free, but you pay for premium content. The beauty of it is Google doesn't penalize paywalled websites. I think a lot of users feel like Google should, like, oh, I don't want to be clicking on the link and then have a login form. But I think Google does that on purpose. Google doesn't want to be seen to penalize websites that are behind a subscription. And it's very straightforward to make your paywall transparent for Google, so Google can see the whole article and rank you based on the entire article, while still showing a login form or a paywall for the average reader. And if someone is really technically savvy, they can probably find a way to bypass that paywall and read the article. But those people are never going to subscribe to you anyway, so there's no reason to make your paywall harder to avoid that anyway. The average reader is not going to try and bypass your paywall. They're either going to subscribe or they're going to go back to something else. The only downside, if you have a fairly hard paywall, especially if you pop up that subscription form fairly early, is that you might still get traffic to the article, but you might not get links to the article. Other sources are not likely to link out to your article as a citation because it's bad user experience for them, which means you tend to accumulate fewer links as a publisher. And links, we know, are still an important part of Google's ranking systems. They're not the be-all, end-all that they used to be, but they're still an important signal that Google uses, especially when it comes to deciding things like authority and trust. So as a paywalled website, you will accumulate fewer links versus a free-to-read website. And that can have long-term negative impacts in terms of your topic authority and your overall trust and authority signals. And that might lead to your articles being shown less frequently in top stories and in other prominent news aspects. So there's no direct instant effect of having a paywall on your articles, at least if they're transparent for Google. But there is an indirect impact in that you accumulate fewer authority signals and therefore might lose out in the long run.
If I, as a user, subscribed to, let's say, 5 news organizations, news brands, can I expect Google to show me those 5 within Google Discover, and less, if you like, what I consider junk, as in sites or brands that I'm not particularly interested in?
Probably. Google doesn't necessarily know who you're subscribed to, but they know which websites you click on. And if you click on those websites again and again, you'll see more from those same websites. It's brand affinity. Google personalizes Discover fairly heavily on brand affinity. When I open up my Discover feed, 9 out of 10 articles will be websites I read every day. Because Google knows I like reading those websites, so they'll show me more from those websites. But Google also tries to mix things up a little bit and sort of try stuff out to see if you engage with that as well. So if they understand that you like to read that website, but the other website also writes about the same topic, they might show you the other website just to see, will you tap on that as well? They want to give it a bit of a diversification in the feed there a little bit. But yeah, the brands that you engage with a lot are the brands you tend to see more of in the Discover feed, because it's obviously working. Google likes it when you read that content. They know that you read it, so they just show you more of it.
So let's say brand number 6 wants to enter the market and wants me as a subscribed user. How then can they penetrate that market and have me subscribe?
This is actually where social media plays a role. If you're active on social media, you build an audience on social media, you build affinity with your brand, and then the article shows up in Discover. If people already know you from social media, they might be more inclined to tap on your result because they're familiar with you. So, building that brand the old-fashioned way, as you would say, classic digital marketing, tends to really work well for building that Discover audience later down the line. You can encourage people to follow you on Discover, follow you on social media, follow you on Google News, and all those signals also feed into those algorithms to make sure that Google serves you more content from that same publisher. Because I don't know about you, but if I see an article from a brand I don't recognize, I'm probably not going to click on it unless the headline's really, really good. Exactly. And the image is really, really good.
Yeah.
But if it's from a brand I know and I trust, then yeah, okay, I'll tap on that. I'll read that. So that's where the brand affinity and classic marketing in general actually plays a really big role.
Yeah. And that is why I think we're in the near future going to see a lot of SEOs focusing on brand-led SEO or entity-based SEO, which would be fascinating in itself. I, for one, I'm all for it. Barry, thank you so much for your time today. If news organizations, lastly, knew this about SEO, they will see business growth exponentially. What would this be?
I think as a news publisher, the best trajectory for long-term success is to try to pick your topics, try to pick your editorial expertise. There's very few websites that can get away with writing about everything. It's the BBC, there's the Guardian, New York Times, maybe a few others. Most publications are not the BBC. You have to pick your topics and you have to own those topics. You have to build up the authority on those topics and say, well, this is us. This is what we write about. This is what we want to be known for, and totally double down on that. If you do that consistently, a long period of time, you will win. You see this reflected in news results all the time. You do a search for a Formula One related topic, for example, you will pretty much exclusively see Formula One or motorsport racing dedicated websites in those top stories boxes, with very few from general news websites. And that's because Google loves ranking specialized news websites for specialized topics. So you want to become a specialist. And if you do that, then, you can own a space and you can be very competitive in that particular topical niche.
Yeah, totally agree. From a classic SEO point of view, think more IMDb, less Wikipedia.
Absolutely.
Barry, thank you so much for your time today. Where can people find you and follow you online?
The only social media platform I'm active on nowadays with any regularity is LinkedIn. You just find Barry Adams LinkedIn. It tend to be one of the first ones show up there, hopefully. I have a newsletter, SEO4GoogleNews.com. Over 8,000 subscribers, which I'm very proud of and also terrified by at the same time. And my consulting website is polemicdigital.com, which is just a bland consultancy website with a contact form. So don't expect too much exciting stuff on there.
I'll have those links in the description, Barry. Thank you so much for your time today. You shared a lot of amazing insights, and I'm sure people will be getting in touch with a number of questions and follow-ups around this. So thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me. This was great fun.
Cheers. Have a brilliant day. Cheers.